Power isn't a badge and a gun. That's just authority. True power is a lens, a signal, and the truth hitting the airwaves in real time. For Marcus Vance, a high school history teacher, his camera was supposed to capture the quiet beauty of his changing neighborhood. But on one suffocatingly hot Saturday morning, his lens found something else entirely. It found two of Atlanta's finest officers, Miller and Davis, systematically breaking a man who had nothing left to lose. What happened next wasn't just an arrest. It was an abuse of power, so blatant, so arrogant, it could only happen when they thought no one of consequence was watching. They were wrong. The heat in Atlanta in early June was a physical presence. It pressed down on the city, shimmering off the asphalt of Oakwood Terrace and making the air thick enough to drink. For Marcus Vance, it was the perfect morning for photography. The light was sharp, casting long, dramatic shadows that transformed the familiar streetscape into something new, something worth capturing. Oakwood Terrace was a neighborhood in transition, a place of jarring contrasts. Renovated bungalows with manicured lawns and smart doorbells sat next to tired, peeling clapboard houses that had weathered half a century of Atlanta's history. It was this very juxtaposition Marcus was trying to document for his personal collection, a project he called The Fraying Edge. He adjusted the settings on his Fujifilm X-Tor, a beautiful retro-styled piece of machinery that felt solid and serious in his hands. He was a history teacher by trade, a man who spent his days explaining the grand, sweeping narratives of the past to teenagers. But on weekends, he was a historian of the present, using his lens to capture the small, fleeting moments that defined his world. He believed that every cracked sidewalk, every new coffee shop told a story. He was framing a shot of an old gnarled oak tree whose roots were buckling the pristine new sidewalk in front of $1 million flip when he heard the voice. It wasn't the friendly chatter of neighbors or the laughter of kids, but a hard, serrated sound that cut through the humid air. "I said, 'What's in the bag, old man?'" Marcus lowered his camera. About 50 yards down the street, a police cruiser was parked haphazardly, its front wheel on the curb. Two officers, one older and thick-set, the other younger and leaner, stood over a man sitting on a bus stop bench. Marcus recognized the man on the bench. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him as Smitty, a Vietnam vet, they said, who'd been dealt a bad hand and never recovered. He was gaunt with a wild mane of graying hair and clothes that seemed to have absorbed the dirt and sorrow of the streets. He was harmless, a ghost who haunted the periphery of their gentrifying world, surviving on small kindnesses and the contents of his battered rucksack. The older officer, whose name tag read Miller, kicked the rucksack with the toe of his polished boot. "You deaf? I asked you a question." Smitty flinched but didn't speak. He just hugged his knees, his eyes fixed on a crack in the pavement. The younger officer, Davis, shifted his weight. He looked less certain, his eyes darting around the quiet street, as if hoping for a distraction. He was just a kid, really, with the kind of fresh-faced look that suggested he still believed in the ideals they taught at the academy. Marcus felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. He'd taught the Civil Rights Unit just last month. He'd shown his students the grainy black-and-white photos of Birmingham and Selma, of men with fire hoses and dogs, and men in uniforms whose authority was absolute and unquestionable. He'd told them that the camera was one of the most powerful weapons in the fight for justice. "Let the world see," he'd said. And here it was, a different century, a different context, but the same ugly dynamic of power and powerlessness. Miller's posture, the contempt in his voice, the casual cruelty of his actions, it was a story that needed to be told. His heart started hammering against his ribs. This was not a protest. He was not an activist. He was Marcus Vance, who paid his mortgage on time, graded papers on Sunday nights, and had never been in any trouble. Getting involved was messy. It was dangerous. It could invite a world of pain he had successfully avoided his entire life. Let the world see. The words of his own lecture echoed in his mind. He took a deep breath, the hot air searing his lungs. He lifted the Fujifilm, the weight of it, suddenly feeling immense like a responsibility. He switched the dial from photo to video. The small red light on the front blinked on almost apologetically. He wasn't a journalist. He didn't know the first thing about this. He just knew he had to point and shoot. He zoomed in the lens, bringing the scene into sharp, unforgiving focus. He could see the sweat beading on Miller's thick neck, the tremor in Smitty's hands, the nervous tick in Davis's jaw. Miller grabbed the rucksack and upended it. A pathetic collection of belongings spilled onto the sidewalk, a worn copy of Slaughterhouse-5, a half-eaten bag of chips, a tin of mints, a folded American flag, and a small framed photo of a young woman. Smitty let out a choked cry and reached for the photo. "Please, that's my girl." Miller placed his boot on the photo, grinding it slightly against the concrete. "We'll determine what's yours after you learn to show some respect for law enforcement. Now where's the contraband? The dope, the pipe? I ain't got it, nothing like that." Smitty pleaded, his voice raspy. "I swear to God." Marcus felt sick. His hands were shaking, but he kept the camera steady. He was capturing it all. The audio was crystal clear. Every word, every scrape of the boot was being recorded. It was then that Miller seemed to sense something. He stopped his torment of Smitty and slowly straightened up his eyes, scanning the street. It was like an animal sensing a predator. His gaze swept past Marcus once, then snapped back, locking onto the dark glint of the camera lens. For a moment, they were frozen, two men, 50 yards apart, connected by an invisible line of sight. Marcus's blood ran cold. The swagger, the confidence, the absolute certainty of his own power. It was all in Miller's eyes. And now that power was turning its focus directly on him. Miller said something to Davis, never taking his eyes off Marcus. The younger officer glanced over his expression, a mixture of surprise and apprehension. Then Miller started walking. Not jogging, not running, just a slow, deliberate walk. Each step was a threat. Each swing of his arms was a promise. He was closing the distance, and with every foot of concrete, he crossed the protective bubble of Marcus's quiet, orderly life, was beginning to dissolve. Marcus kept filming. His mind was screaming at him to run, to delete the footage, to pretend he was just taking pictures of a tree. But his hands wouldn't obey. The history teacher in him, the man who believed in evidence and testimony, refused to back down. Miller stopped about 10 feet away. He was bigger up close, a wall of navy blue and simmering rage. "You having a good time?" Miller asked, his voice deceptively calm. "I'm on a public sidewalk, officer." Marcus said, his own voice sounding surprisingly steady, though his heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of his chest. "I didn't ask where you were. I asked if you were having a good time, getting your kicks filming us while we do our job." "I'm documenting your interaction," Marcus stated, keeping the camera trained on the officer's face. "It's my First Amendment right." A smirk played on Miller's lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, a constitutional scholar. We get a lot of you geniuses. You think that camera makes you invincible?" He took another step forward. "Here's a little lesson for you. Interfering with a police investigation is a crime, and right now, your little movie is interfering. I'm not interfering. I'm 50 yards away from your initial. I decide what interference is. Miller snapped his voice, finally cracking with anger. Not you, not your camera. Me. Now shut it off. I'm not going to do that, officer. You're in public performing your duties. There's no expectation of privacy. Marcus was channeling every documentary he'd ever seen, every article he'd ever read. He was right. He knew he was right. But being right didn't matter. Miller's eyes narrowed into slits. You're a real smart guy, aren't you? Let's see how smart you are when you're in the back of my car. He looked back at Davis, who was now standing awkwardly by the cruiser, watching the scene unfold. Davis, get over here. This one wants to play. Davis jogged over his face, pale. What's going on, Ron? We got ourselves a regular citizen journalist here, Miller said with a sneer. Thinks he can get in our faces. He's refusing a lawful order to cease his recording, which is obstructing our investigation into the vagrant. He gestured vaguely back towards Smitty, who was now frantically trying to gather his scattered belongings. The lie was so bald-faced, so effortless, it took Marcus's breath away. He hadn't been in their faces. He hadn't been given a lawful order until seconds ago. The investigation was a sham. Officer, Marcus said, trying to appeal to the younger cop. Your partner is lying. I was across the street. He is fabricating a charge because he doesn't like being filmed. Davis looked from Miller to Marcus, his eyes wide with uncertainty. He opened his mouth to say something, but Miller cut him off. Are you going to stand there, or are you going to help me cuff this mouthy son of a bitch? Miller barked. The moment stretched into an eternity. Marcus saw the conflict in Davis's eyes. He saw the flicker of conscience, the desire to do the right thing. But he also saw the fear of his senior partner of the system of the Blue Line. The fear won. Davis's expression hardened into a mask of professional detachment. He moved to Marcus's side. Sir, put the camera down and place your hands behind your back. Davis said, his voice flat. You know this is wrong. Marcus said, his voice quiet but intense. Sir, don't resist. It was happening. It was actually happening. Miller lunged forward and grabbed the camera, wrenching it from Marcus's grip. The strap bit into Marcus's neck before snapping. The precious Fujifilm X-T4, his weekend joy, crashed to the pavement with a sickening crunch. The screen shattered. The lens cracked. The recording stopped. But the real-life horror was just beginning. Miller shoved him from behind, sending him stumbling forward. Davis grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back with a practiced, painful efficiency. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into his wrists. As they clicked shut, the sound seemed to echo in the oppressive silence of the street. You have the right to remain silent. Miller began to recite, his voice dripping with triumphant malice. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As he was being forced into the back of the scorching hot police car, his cheek pressing against the hard plastic seat, Marcus locked eyes with Smitty. The old man was standing now, his rucksack clutched to his chest, the framed photo in his hand. There was no victory in Smitty's eyes, only a profound, shared sorrow. The world had seen nothing. The lens was broken, and Officer Miller had won. The inside of the police cruiser was a furnace. Plastic and old sweat baked together into an acrid smell that filled Marcus's nostrils. Every bump and turn of the car sent a fresh wave of pain through his shoulders from the overly tight handcuffs. He was a history teacher, a taxpayer, a man who had until an hour ago considered himself a partner with law enforcement in the grand project of a civil society. Now he was cargo. In the front, Miller drove with a casual, one-handed confidence, humming along to a country song on the radio. He was triumphant. Davis sat stiffly in the passenger seat, staring out the window, refusing to meet Marcus's gaze in the rearview mirror. The silence from the passenger seat was more damning than Miller's gloating. It was the silence of complicity, the quiet hum of a man choosing the path of least resistance, even when it led off a moral cliff. The precinct was a whirlwind of institutional indifference. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow pallor on everything. Marcus was processed not as a person, but as a piece of paperwork. His watch, wallet, and keys were dropped into a plastic bag. He was fingerprinted the black ink, a stain of his new identity. When he was told to stand for his mugshot, he looked directly into the camera, not with defiance, but with a profound sense of disbelief. This was his new history, a permanent record of a morning that had spun out of his control. He was charged with 3 offenses: obstruction of a governmental administration, resisting arrest, and most outrageously assault in the 3rd degree. The assault was based on Miller's claim that when he'd reached for the camera, Marcus had jerked away violently, causing Miller to sprain his wrist. The lie was as flimsy as it was insulting. They put him in a holding cell with 3 other men. One was asleep, snoring loudly. Another was detoxing, trembling, and muttering to himself. The third just stared at the wall, his face a mask of utter despair. The heavy steel door clanged shut, a sound of absolute finality. Marcus sat on the cold concrete bench, the shame and anger washing over him in waves. He had done the right thing. He had stood up to a bully, and this was his reward. His camera was destroyed. His reputation was on the line. The truth he had tried to capture was lost, shattered on a sidewalk in Oakwood Terrace. He got his phone call an hour later. His hands shook as he dialed the number he knew better than his own. "Sarah Vance," she answered, her voice crisp and professional even on a Saturday. Sarah was a corporate litigator, a woman who lived in a world of contracts and depositions, of finding the single weak word in a 100-page document that could bring a case tumbling down. "Sarah, it's me." The line went silent for a beat. All the professional poise vanished. "Marcus, what's wrong? You sound awful. Where are you?" I'm at the APD Zone 6 precinct. I've been arrested." The silence this time was heavier, charged with 1,000 questions. "Arrested for what?" Marcus talked to me. He explained it as best he could, his voice low and hurried. The harassment of Smitty, the camera, Miller's rage, the fabricated charges. He heard her take a deep, controlled breath. When she spoke again, the scared wife was gone and the lawyer was back in her place. "Okay, listen to me. Do not say another word to anyone, not a single word. Don't answer any questions. Don't try to explain yourself. Just sit there and be quiet. I'm on my way. I'll have you out in an hour." "Sarah, they smashed my camera. It's gone. We'll deal with that later. Just stay quiet. I love you. I love you too." The line clicked. Marcus felt a small sliver of hope. Sarah was his advocate, his warrior. But even she couldn't fight a battle without evidence, and the evidence was in pieces. Back on Oakwood Terrace, the sun had climbed higher, bleaching the color from the sky. The street was quiet again, the drama of the morning having dissipated like a bad dream. Smitty sat on the bus stop bench, his meager possessions carefully repacked into his rucksack. The framed photo of his daughter, her smile a relic from a better time, was tucked safely inside. He stared at the spot on the sidewalk where Marcus's camera had been destroyed. Tiny shards of black plastic and glass glittered in the harsh sunlight. When Miller had smashed the camera against the pavement, a small black square had popped out of its side, skittering unnoticed under the edge of the bench. With a lifetime of practice in being invisible, of observing everything, while being seen by no one, Smitty had noticed. While the officers were busy cuffing the history teacher, he had shuffled his feet casually, kicking the small object further under the bench. Later, when the cruiser had sped away, he had knelt his old bones, protesting, and picked it up. Now he opened his calloused, dirt-caked hand. In his palm lay a SanDisk Extreme Pre-O SD card. It was so small, so insignificant. A tiny, fragile vessel of plastic and silicon. He didn't know much about technology, but he knew what it was. It was a memory. He had seen Marcus point the camera. He had seen the little red light. He knew what was on this card. He looked up and down the street. He could just throw it away. Getting involved was trouble, and his life already had more trouble than it could handle. But then he thought of the teacher's face, the shock, the indignation, the fear. He thought of the officer's boot on his daughter's picture. It was the same boot, figuratively speaking, that had been on his own neck for 30 years. Smitty carefully wrapped the SD card in a napkin from his pocket and tucked it deep into his rucksack. It was a dangerous thing to have a secret that could bring the wrath of men like Miller down on him. But it was also something else. It was a seed, and in the right hands, it might just grow into justice. Meanwhile, in the Zone 6 precinct, Officers Miller and Davis were writing their report. The squad room was a chaotic symphony of ringing phones and clattering keyboards. For them, it was just paperwork, the boring but necessary epilogue to the adrenaline of the street. So Perp became agitated when we questioned the vagrant, Miller dictated, leaning back in his chair while Davis typed. He approached us in an aggressive manner, shouting about his rights. He was 50 yards away. Ron. Davis muttered his fingers, hesitating over the keyboard. He was advancing. His tone was threatening. He refused multiple lawful orders to disperse and cease his illegal recording. Miller took a sip of his burnt coffee. When I attempted to secure the recording device as evidence, he resisted violently, causing a sprain to my right wrist. He flexed his wrist for emphasis. There was nothing wrong with it. Davis knew it, but he typed the words anyway. Each keystroke was another brick in the wall of the official story, a story that was burying Marcus Vance alive. The camera was damaged during the struggle. Miller concluded with a satisfied nod. Bagged it for evidence. Let's go take a look. They went to the evidence locker. The shattered Fujifilm was in a clear plastic bag, tagged with a case number. Miller held it up. Damn shame, he said with no shame in his voice at all. That's an expensive piece of gear. He should have just listened. He peered at the broken body of the camera. Where's the memory card? Davis looked closer. The small slot on the side of the camera was empty. I don't know. Must have popped out when it hit the ground. Find it? Miller asked. We were busy, Ron. It's a tiny little thing. Probably fell in the grass or a gutter. It's gone. Miller shrugged. No big deal. Without the card, the camera's just a piece of broken junk. No video, no problem. He tossed the bag onto the desk. Our report is the only evidence that matters now. He clapped his partner on the shoulder. See, clean and simple. You worry too much, kid. Davis didn't answer. He looked at the shattered camera, then at his partner's smiling, confident face. He had crossed a line today, and he knew with a sinking feeling in his gut that there was no going back. The lie was told. The report was filed. The story was set in stone. Or so they thought. Because at that very moment, a silver Lexus sedan pulled into the precinct parking lot, and a woman with eyes like chips of ice stepped out. Sarah Vance had arrived, and she was about to start chipping away at their story stone by fraudulent stone. Sarah Vance did not look like someone whose world had just been upended. As she walked through the doors of the Zone 6 precinct, she moved with a purpose that parted the sea of anxious, weary people waiting inside. She wore a simple but impeccably tailored blazer over a silk blouse, her Saturday armor less formal than her courtroom attire, but no less intimidating. Her focus was so absolute that the precinct's oppressive atmosphere seemed to recede from her. She approached the high front desk behind which a grizzled, pot-bellied desk sergeant was slowly peeling an orange, the zest scenting the air with a strange, sweet smell that didn't belong. "I'm here to see Marcus Vance," Sarah said, her voice even and clear, "and I need a copy of the arresting officer's incident report. My name is Sarah Vance. I'm his wife and his legal counsel." The sergeant, whose nameplate read Sullivan, looked up slowly, his expression a well-practiced mask of boredom. "He's in processing. You'll have to wait." He went back to his orange. "I'm not waiting," Sarah replied, her tone hardening just enough to cut through his indifference. "My client is being held on what I have reason to believe are falsified charges. I need to see him now, and I need that report. If you can't provide it, perhaps your watch commander can." Sullivan paused a section of orange peel halfway to the trash can. He'd dealt with frantic family members and belligerent drunks all day. This was different. This was a woman who used words like client and falsified with the casual precision of a surgeon handling a scalpel. He sighed the sound of a man who knew he'd lost before the fight had even begun. "Give me a minute," he grumbled, pushing himself away from the desk. 10 minutes later, he returned with a 2-page printout. He slid it across the counter without a word. Sarah picked it up. As she read, a cold, quiet fury began to build within her. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of her husband, but a focused, analytical rage. She was a litigator. Her job was to deconstruct narratives, to find the weak points, the logical fallacies, the lies of omission. This report was an amateurishly constructed fiction. Approached us in an aggressive manner. Marcus aggressive. The man who apologized to telemarketers for not having time to talk, shouting about his rights. He was a history teacher. He would have been explaining his rights, not shouting. Resisted violently, causing a sprain to my right wrist. This was the cornerstone of the lie, the part that elevated a bogus obstruction charge into a physical assault. It was Miller's cynical masterpiece. She could picture him flexing a perfectly healthy wrist for his partner, creating an injury out of thin air to justify their actions. Her eyes scanned the bottom of the report. Arresting officers, Ronald Miller badge, number 714. Michael Davis badge, number 822. She committed the names and numbers to memory. They were no longer just cops. They were adversaries. "I'm seeing my client now," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Sullivan grunted and nodded toward a small, soulless room off the main lobby. 5 minutes. The reunion was a punch to the gut. Marcus sat at a small metal table, his shoulders slumped, his face pale and streaked with grime. The cuffs were off, but red welts circled his wrists. He looked up as she entered, and his attempt at a smile was heartbreaking. Sarah closed the door and rushed to him, her composure momentarily breaking as she wrapped her arms around him. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" "Just my pride," he whispered into her shoulder. "Sarah, they lied about everything. Every single thing." "I know," she said, pulling back and looking him in the eyes, her strength flowing back into her. I read the report. It's garbage, Marcus. But it's official garbage, which means we have to fight it. She took his hands. Listen to me. Bail is being posted. You'll be out of here soon. When you are, we go home. You don't talk to anyone. You don't post on social media. You don't even talk to our neighbors about it. From this moment on, I am the only person you speak to about this case. Do you understand? He nodded, a flicker of his old self returning. What are we going to do? It's their word against mine. They smashed the camera. The proof is gone. No. Sarah said, her voice low and fierce. The proof isn't gone. You are the proof. Your record, your reputation, your entire life is the proof. A jury will look at you, and they will look at that report, and they will have to decide who is more credible. Her mind was already racing, formulating a strategy. But first things first, we need to find the man on the bench, Smitty. He's our witness. He saw the whole thing from the very beginning. As Sarah's Lexus pulled out of the precinct, Officer Miller watched from a window in the squad room. Davis stood beside him nervously, chewing on a thumbnail. That her? Miller asked. Guess so. Looks like she means business. She's a lawyer, Miller said with a dismissive scoff. They all look like they mean business. It's part of the uniform. He turned away from the window. Don't sweat it, Mikey. The report is solid. The camera's broken. The vagrant is probably 50 miles away by now, if he even remembers what happened. It's a he said, she said. And when one of the he's is wearing a badge, he wins. Every time. Miller's confidence was a force of nature, a gravitational field that pulled others into its orbit. Davis wanted to believe him. He needed to believe him. But as he thought of Sarah Vance's icy stare, a knot of dread tightened in his stomach. This didn't feel like a win. It felt like the quiet before a storm. Miles away, the sun began its slow descent, painting the Atlanta sky in hues of orange and purple. Smitty was no longer on the bus stop bench. He had shuffled his way to his usual spot for the night, a small, sheltered alcove behind a laundromat, a place that offered some protection from the elements and the unwanted attention of the world. He sat on a bed of flattened cardboard boxes, his rucksack held tightly in his lap. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about the teacher Marcus and the lawyer wife with fire in her eyes. He had seen her leave the police station, her face a mask of grim determination. He knew she would fight, but he also knew what she was up against. From the depths of his bag, he retrieved the napkin-wrapped SD card. He unfolded it carefully, the small black chip lying in his palm like a dark secret. He had spent his life running, hiding, staying out of the way. It was how he had survived. To step forward now to volunteer was to invite the kind of trouble that could swallow a man like him whole. Men like Miller had long memories. But then he thought of the boot on his daughter's photograph. He thought of the casual cruelty, the absolute certainty that he didn't matter, that he was less than human. The teacher had tried to stand up for him. He had pointed his camera and refused to look away. He had treated Smitty like a person worthy of dignity. It was a debt. And Smitty, for all he had lost in his life, still believed in paying his debts. He looked at the SD card. It felt heavy in his hand, freighted with the weight of a decision. He didn't have a phone or a computer. He had no way of contacting the teacher or his wife. He didn't even know their names. But he knew where the teacher lived. He had seen him come and go from the renovated bungalow with the gnarled oak tree out front. Getting up his joints, creaking in protest, Smitty tucked the SD card back into its safe place. The sun had set, and the streetlights of Oakwood Terrace were beginning to flicker on, casting pools of lonely light onto the pavement. He was a ghost in this neighborhood, a man who moved through the shadows. And tonight, the ghost had a mission. He began the slow, painful walk back toward the fraying edge where it had all begun. He was going to deliver the memory. He was going to deliver the truth. The home of Marcus and Sarah Vance was a world away from Smitty's alcove behind the laundromat. It was a renovated 1920s bungalow, painted a tasteful slate grey with a bright white trim. A stone path wound through a carefully tended garden, and a welcoming yellow light glowed from the front windows. For Smitty, standing across the street in the deep shadows of the gnarled oak tree, it felt as inaccessible as a fortress. He clutched the rucksack to his chest, the small, hard shape of the SD card, a constant reminder of his purpose. Getting here had been an act of will. Now came the harder part. How did a man like him approach a house like this? If he knocked on the door, would they even open it? Or would they see his ragged clothes and weathered face and call the very people he was trying to help them fight? The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He was a ghost, and ghosts didn't knock on front doors. Inside the house was silent, but the silence was heavy with tension. Marcus sat in a leather armchair, a glass of untouched whiskey on the table beside him. He hadn't spoken more than a few words since they'd gotten home. The humiliation of the arrest had hollowed him out, replaced his quiet confidence with a gnawing sense of violation. He felt like a fool for believing that his rights were a shield. They were just words on a piece of paper, easily torn up by a man with a badge and a bad attitude. Sarah was in her home office, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating her face. She wasn't just his wife tonight. She was his lawyer, and she was at war. She had already filed a formal notice of representation with the court and a request for a preservation order on all video evidence from the officers' body cams and vehicle dash cam. She knew with cynical certainty that the footage would likely be corrupted or lost, but filing the request was a necessary first step. It laid the groundwork. She was building a timeline, a character file, a defense strategy based on the flimsy hope that a jury would believe a history teacher over two sworn officers of the law. It felt like trying to build a dam with sand. Without her own evidence, she was fighting with one hand tied behind her back. She closed her laptop with a frustrated sigh and went to the living room. "We should try to find him," she said, her voice softer than it had been all day. "Smitty, tomorrow. We can drive around, ask people. He's the only one who saw it all." Marcus just stared into his whiskey. "And what if Miller and his partner get to him first? What do you think they'll do to a homeless man to make sure he keeps his mouth shut?" The thought hung in the air between them, ugly and undeniable. The hope Sarah had been trying to nurture flickered. They were trapped in the officer's narrative. Across the street, Smitty made his decision. He couldn't go to the front door. But he had to deliver his message. He scanned the front of the house, his eyes accustomed to finding details in the dark. He saw the brass mail slot in the center of the front door. It was a direct line, a way in without having to cross the threshold. He needed something to put the card in, something to protect it. Rummaging through his rucksack past the worn book and the folded flag, his fingers found a small empty envelope, wrinkled but intact, that had once held a coupon. It would have to do. He took a deep breath like a diver about to plunge into cold water. He pulled his hoodie up, obscuring his face, and shuffled across the empty street. Every step felt loud on the quiet asphalt. He expected headlights to appear at any moment, to be caught in the glare exposed. He reached the front walk. The stones were smooth under his worn-out shoes. He moved quickly up the path, his heart hammering. At the door, his hands fumbled as he placed the tiny SD card into the flimsy envelope. He pushed it through the brass slot. It made a soft thwump as it landed on the hardwood floor inside. He didn't wait. He turned and scurried back into the darkness, melting back into the shadows of the oak tree. His mission was complete. He had passed the torch. The rest was up to them. The small sound from the hallway startled them both. "What was that?" Sarah asked. "Probably just the mail," Marcus said, listlessly. "A flyer or something." But it was almost 10 p.m. The mailman didn't make late-night deliveries. A sense of unease prompted Sarah to get up and check. She walked into the foyer and looked down. Lying on the polished floor was a single, crumpled, cheap-looking envelope. There was no name, no address on it. Curious, she bent down and picked it up. It was so light it felt empty. She tore it open. Inside, nestled in the fold, was the tiny black square of the SanDisk memory card. She stared at it, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Marcus, come here." He dragged himself out of the chair and joined her in the hall. "What is it?" "I don't know," she said, holding out her palm. "This was in the envelope." Marcus looked at the SD card. It was identical to the one he used in his Fujifilm. For a moment his heart leaped with an impossible hope. "You don't think—" "How?" Sarah breathed. "The police have your camera." "The card must have popped out," Marcus said, the energy finally returning to his voice. "When he smashed it, it must have." He looked from the card to the mail slot. Smitty. It had to be him. He must have seen it, picked it up. They rushed into Sarah's office. Sarah grabbed a USB card reader and plugged it into her laptop. With trembling fingers, Marcus inserted the tiny card. The computer chimed, recognizing the new device. A folder appeared on the screen. DCIM. Sarah clicked it open. There was one file inside. A video file. MP4. "Play it," Marcus whispered. Sarah double-clicked. The video filled the screen. It was sharp, professional quality footage. The audio was perfect. It began with the shot of the oak tree, then panned down the street. And there it was, Miller standing over Smitty on the bench. "I said what's in the bag, old man." They watched in rapt silence as the entire encounter unfolded exactly as Marcus remembered it, but now rendered in undeniable high-definition reality. They saw Miller kick the bag, saw him grind his boot on the photograph of Smitty's daughter. They heard every word of his contemptuous speech. Then the camera swings around. Miller is walking towards them, his face a mask of fury. "You having a good time?" They watched the confrontation. Marcus's calm, correct assertion of his rights, Miller's escalating anger, and his bald-faced lies. "Davis, get over here. This one wants to play." The footage captured the flicker of doubt in the younger officer's eyes before he chose his side. It captured the moment Miller lunged, the sound of the camera strap snapping, and then the sickening crunch as the world tilted and the screen went black. For a full minute after the video ended, neither of them spoke. The laptop screen cast a pale glow on their stunned faces. The despair, the hopelessness, it all evaporated, replaced by a surge of adrenaline so powerful it was almost dizzying. "Oh, he is so screwed," Sarah finally said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Miller is going to lose his job, his pension, and his freedom, and Davis is going right down with him." Marcus was about to agree when he noticed something. "Wait. Go back. Play the last part again." Sarah rewound the video to the final chaotic seconds before the camera was smashed. The view was tilted shaky. "There!" "Pause it," Marcus shouted, pointing at the screen. In the top right corner of the frame, reflected in the window of a parked car, was a small, unmistakable image. It was another camera's view. A wider shot. It showed Marcus standing his ground and the two officers confronting him. And just visible, mounted on the doorframe of the house across the street, a house they knew belonged to the Hendersons, was the small black circle of a Ring doorbell camera. The lens of Marcus's own camera, in its final dying second, had captured the existence of its own corroborating witness. Sarah leaned in her eyes wide. She looked at Marcus, and a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. This changed everything. The SD card was their sword. The Ring camera was their shield. It was objective. It was a third-party witness that couldn't be intimidated or discredited. It would show Miller smashing the camera. It would show the tiny SD card flying through the air. It might even show Smitty picking it up. This was no longer a case about defending a good man from a lie. This was a case about burying two bad cops with the truth. Tomorrow morning. Sarah said, her fingers already flying across the keyboard, drafting a new set of legal documents. "I'm not just fighting these charges. I'm calling the district attorney's office. And then I'm making another call. To a friend of mine at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. No better. Someone national." A specific name came to mind, a reporter known for her tenacity and her national reach. It's time the world saw what happened on Oakwood Terrace. It's time to bring in CNN. Sunday morning broke with a deceptive calm. Inside the Vance home, however, there was no peace. Sarah had been awake since 4 a.m. Her mind a churning engine of legal strategy and cold fury. The SD card, the anonymous gift that had changed everything, lay on her desk like a sacred relic. Her first instinct was to file motions to begin the slow grind of the court system. But Miller and Davis hadn't played by the rules. They had used their power to create a false reality. Sarah decided she wouldn't fight them on their turf. She would change the battlefield entirely. Her finger hovered over the contact info for the district attorney's office before scrolling past. That was a battle for another day. Today required a different sort of weapon. She found the number she was looking for, a name from her law school past, who was now a familiar face on national television. At 6 o'clock, she made the call. "This had better be good, Vance," Ana Cabrera answered her voice, a groggy rasp from New York. "It's better than good, Ana," Sarah said, her voice tight with purpose. "It's video of 2 APD officers manufacturing a crime to arrest my husband. They framed him for assault, destroyed his camera, and filed a fraudulent report. They just didn't get the memory card." There was a pause, then the sound of rustling sheets. The journalist in Anna was coming online. "You have the whole thing on video. Every lie. And the best part." His camera captured the reflection of a neighbor's Ring doorbell in a car window. "We have a corroborating angle. It's airtight." Sarah's voice was steady, but her heart was pounding. This was the point of no return. "Send it to me," Anna said, now fully awake. "Now." Sarah attached the MP4 file and the falsified police report to an email adding a still frame of the Ring camera's reflection. She titled it, "The Whole Story." Then she closed the laptop. There was nothing to do but wait. The next 2 hours were the longest of Marcus's life. He and Sarah sat in their kitchen nursing coffees they didn't taste. For Marcus, it felt as though his life was no longer his own, a story handed to a national news network. He felt a terrifying vertigo, a passenger hurtling towards a very public destination. Just after 8 a.m., Sarah's phone rang. It was Anna, her voice electric. "I've watched it 5 times, Sarah. My producer, legal everyone. This is a powder keg. The Ring camera is the nail in their coffin. We've reached out to your neighbors, the Hendersons. They're horrified and giving us their full cooperation and footage. A crew is on the way to you now. We're going live at 11. "Live?" Marcus choked out. "This isn't an evening news story, Marcus," Anna said, her voice firm but kind. "This is a breaking story about police misconduct with irrefutable video. This is what we do. The public needs to see this happen in real time. We can blur your face, but your testimony is more powerful if they see the man this was done to." Marcus looked at Sarah. Her expression was resolute. This was it. The fear was still a cold knot in his stomach, but something else was rising to meet it. Indignation. The history teacher in him knew what he had to do. "No," Marcus said, his voice finding a strength he didn't know he possessed. "Don't blur my face. Let the world see." By 10:30 a.m., Oakwood Terrace was transformed into a bustling television set. A gleaming CNN satellite truck was parked at the curb cables, snaking across lawns. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains at the inexplicable scene. In the middle of it all, Ana Cabrera stood a vision of calm command. 2 miles away in the Zone 6 squad room, Officer Ron Miller was finishing his paperwork with a self-satisfied smirk. The citizen journalist was yesterday's problem handled. "Cheer up, Mikey," he said, slapping his partner's back. Davis sat staring blankly at his screen. "It's over. The report is filed. End of story." Just then, dispatch crackled to life. "All units be advised. We're getting calls about a major media disturbance on Oakwood Terrace. 744-822, you're the closest unit. Go check it out." Miller grabbed his keys, a predatory grin on his face. Chasing off news crews was a favorite pastime. "Come on, Davis," he said with a wink. "Let's go teach CNN about city ordinances." Davis said nothing. The knot of dread in his stomach had become a heavy stone. Oakwood Terrace. The address was a warning bell. This felt like a trap. As they drove, Miller was giddy. "You just got to know how to talk to 'em, Mikey," he lectured. "Show 'em the badge puff out your chest. They scatter like cockroaches." Davis just stared out the window, a cold sweat on his palms. They turned the final corner, and Miller's grin vanished, replaced by stunned disbelief. The entire street was a media encampment, centered on one house. And on the lawn, talking to Ana Cabrera, was Marcus Vance. "What the hell is this?" Miller breathed. Years of unchallenged arrogance took over. This was an affront to his authority. He threw the cruiser into park and strode onto the scene like a conquering general. Davis followed his movements, hesitant, feeling as though he were walking toward his own execution. "All right, show's over," Miller barked, his voice booming. "You have 5 minutes to pack this circus up before I start making arrests." Ana Cabrera turned to face him. She didn't look intimidated. She looked like a predator whose prey had just walked into the snare. "Officer Miller, thank you for joining us," she said smoothly, as her cameraman framed both officers perfectly. "We're live on CNN. My name is Ana Cabrera. I was just speaking with Marcus Vance. You arrested him yesterday. Perhaps you could share your version of those events with our global audience." Miller was speechless. The red light on the camera was a malevolent, unblinking eye. Live. Global audience. The words hit him like a physical blow. He glanced at Davis, whose face was ashen. This wasn't a local crew he could bully. This was the Abyss, and he had just swan-dived into it. "This is an ongoing investigation," Miller blustered, falling back on procedure. "I can't comment." "That's fine," Anna said with a chilling smile. "Because we have the video. Roll the tape." Time slowed on the sun-drenched lawn as the world compressed into the 50-inch monitor, displaying Ron Miller's downfall. The smug confidence that had been his armor for 2 decades shattered, leaving a terrified man in a uniform that now felt like a costume. Beside him, Michael Davis trembled violently, seeing his future swallowed whole, because he'd been too weak to defy a bully. The official story was dead, and its ghost was haunting them on live television for the world to see. As Ana Cabrera's cameraman zoomed in on their faces, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension. Deputy Chief Alan Reynolds, the head of Internal Affairs, had arrived. Ignoring the cameras, his focus was absolute. "Miller, Davis, hand me your sidearms and your badges, now!" It was a swift public excommunication. Miller, moving like a man in a dream, fumbled with his holster, his hands shaking too badly to easily unclip his badge. Davis complied immediately, a sense of relief in his surrender. As he handed over his weapon, his eyes met Marcus Vance's in a silent, apologetic nod, a promise to finally tell the truth. "You are both suspended effective immediately," Reynolds stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "A car is coming for you. You will be taken to headquarters for questioning in a criminal investigation." The fallout was brutal. The Oakwood Terrace video went viral, becoming a hashtag for police accountability. Under immense public pressure, the district attorney's office charged Ron Miller with filing a false report, perjury, and felony violation of his oath. Convicted on all counts, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison, stripped of his pension. Michael Davis, true to his promise, cooperated fully and pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor, receiving 2 years of probation. His career was over. All charges against Marcus Vance were, of course, expunged. The civil suit against the city was settled quickly, but for Marcus it was never about the money. He became an accidental activist, a history teacher thrust into making history, speaking about citizen oversight and the power of a lens. They didn't forget the man who made it possible. They found Smitty on the same bus stop bench and, using the settlement funds, established a trust to ensure he would never be homeless again. A veterans advocacy group got him into a housing program with the care he'd needed for decades. 3 months later, a clean-shaven Smitty stood on a new porch holding a pristine print of his daughter's photograph. When the door opened and a woman in her 40s gasped, "Dad, Tuma!" He was finally home. The fraying edge of Oakwood Terrace had been mended not by gentrification, but by courage. The story you just heard is a reminder that power isn't always held by those with a badge and a uniform. Sometimes it's held by an ordinary person with a camera, a witness who refuses to look away, or an outcast who decides to do the right thing. Marcus Vance and Smitty showed us that courage and integrity can change the world, one recording at a time. The powerful are only powerful if we allow them to be. The truth, when brought into the light, is a force that cannot be denied. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with others who need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories of justice and karma. And let us know in the comments below, what would you have done in Marcus's position? Thank you for watching.